All right, it's Tuesday, Fat Tuesday, which means tomorrow is Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about fasting. Is fasting for Lent just a religious tradition, or is fasting a secret weapon for your spiritual life? Today, we're going to break down what fasting actually is. Fasting is not just skipping meals or some type of spiritual detox. Fasting is shutting down distractions and stepping into God's power. One of the passages we're going to dive into tonight is from Isaiah. If you joined me in December for the Advent devotionals, you'll know that Isaiah is one of the major prophets from the Bible. Isaiah's words carried weight. His words also delivered truth and carried God's promises to the people. All right, so the passage I'm going to read comes from Isaiah 58. Is not this the fast that I chose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. Isaiah was a prophet during this time. During this time, Israel was divided and they were struggling spiritually. The people were still performing religious rituals. They were fasting and praying and offering sacrifices, but their hearts were far from God. Instead of seeking justice and seeking mercy, they were exploiting the poor and ignoring the oppressed and living lavishly. And so how does that apply to us today? Just like Israel, many people today are going through the motions of faith, attending church, maybe saying prayers, and maybe even fasting, but their actions don't reflect God's heart. God is saying now the same thing he was saying back then. True fasting is not just about what you stop eating. In Isaiah 58, verses 6 through 7, fasting is about several different things. In the beginning, fasting is about freedom. When the scripture says to loose the bonds of wickedness and break every yoke, that means that fasting should bring about real change, including breaking sinful habits and strongholds in our lives. Fasting is not just personal, it's also communal. God was calling for a fast that cares for the oppressed and the marginalized. Fasting is also about generosity. When the scripture says, share your bread with the hungry, that means that fasting should make us more aware of those people who are in need and lead us to give. Fasting is also about compassion. True fasting changes how we treat others, including our own family. The scripture says not to hide yourself from your own flesh. So fasting really isn't about starving. It's about sharpening your spirit and serving others. So the next passage we're going to discuss comes from the book of Matthew, and it's going to be from Jesus himself. In Matthew 6, verses 16 through 18. When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, but when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face. So in this passage, Jesus is speaking to a mixed crowd. This passage comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he was teaching what true righteousness looks like. Not just outward religious acts, but a transformed heart. In Jesus' time, fasting had become more about public display than true devotion. The Pharisees, when they would fast in a way that would make them look extra holy. They would walk around looking miserable so everyone would know that they were fasting. Jesus was calling this out. He was saying that true fasting is between you and God, and it's inner transformation, not external performance. And just a few more things about this scripture from the Sermon on the Mount. Fasting is about intentionality. Jesus says, when you fast, not if you fast. That means that it should be a normal part of a believer's life. And then also, he was saying that fasting is about a heart posture. Avoid fake holiness and focus on a genuine connection with God. And then fasting is about seeking God, not people's approval. True fasting is not for show. It's about spiritual depth and intimacy with God. Fasting is rewarded by God. Jesus promises that when fasting is done in secret, God will reward it openly. I think it's great when you fast at other times than Lent. Specifically, those of you who've done the Daniel fast or doing fasting at other times in the year. I think fasting before Lent gets you disciplined before the long haul, because the Lent fasting is 40 days. You'll get to figure out what's holding you back. And then also you'll get to start breaking at bad habits, and then you'll get serious about a breakthrough. One thing I will say, if you did want to try to fast before Lent, I think a short fast, maybe 1 to 3 days, that would be a good way to ease into fasting if you've never fasted before. Ultimately, you would seek God for what He wants you to surrender. You might want to start with junk food or TV or social media. But again, ultimately, any distractions you would cut out. But ultimately, God will let you know what you need to surrender. So, Lent is here, but it's not too late to start. Whether you've been fasting all your life or fasting for several years. Maybe you started for the first time at the beginning of this year, or maybe you were wanting to start on Ash Wednesday. Either way, if you're just now considering it, you didn't consider it before, you're just now considering, ask God what He wants you to do during this season. Let's try to commit to seeking Him wholeheartedly and starting today. So I'm going to be with you doing another devotional for Lent, and tomorrow we're going to be in Joel, and I look forward to seeing you for Ash Wednesday. Good night.